911, do you need police, fire, medical?
My daughter's dead. She just had me go in there.
Sir, did she hang herself?
No, she didn't hang herself, but
How old is she?
around her. She's 11 years old.
On November 29, 2001, Amanda Cope, who was 12 years old, was found dead in her bed in Rock Hill, South Carolina. She had been strangled. Tragically, her father, Billy Cope, found her, and he went into shock right away. When the cops came to look into it, they found a strange scene and quickly figured out who the main suspect was. Hi, and welcome back to Cold Case Diaries. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, as it helps us motivate to create more intriguing content for you. Let's have a look at the case with the most insane twists you've ever heard. Let's get started without further ado.
Is she breathing?
Oh, no, she's dead. She's cold as a cucumber. And
Okay, you don't want to try to CPR or anything on her?
no, ma'am, she's dead. I mean, her mouth is completely shut. She's ice cold.
Okay, when was the last time you saw her alive, sir?
About 2 o'clock this morning.
About 2 o'clock this morning. Has she been
1 o'clock this morning.
Has she been sick or anything?
No, ma'am. The thing was just wrapped around her neck.
Was it her bed clothing or her sheet?
It was her blanket. She just had a blanket laying there, and she rolled over and it wrapped around her neck. It's the green thing on the blanket. She laid on the green blanket with a green blanket, and it had a string wrapped around it. I mean, I gotta call my wife.
Okay. Okay, what kind of house do you live in, sir? What color's your house?
It's white. But she's gone on to be with the Lord, but she was a Christian. Please, I really
Okay. All right,
I
sir.
have my light on.
All right, sir.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Billy Cope abruptly awakened around 3 a.m., immediately sensing an unsettling disturbance within this household. The light in the hall was on, and he thought he had turned it off before going to bed. His wife, Mary Sue, was cleaning offices overnight, so he was at home with their 3 girls, Amanda, Jessica, and Kyla. They were faithful Christians, but they didn't go to church on Wednesday night like they usually did because Jessica was having trouble with her math homework and needed extra help to finish it. Amanda, the older sister, who was kind, offered to help her. Billy agreed to let the 2 girls stay up as late as they needed in order to get the job done. The youngest daughter, Kyla, went to bed around 9 p.m., but Billy helped his 2 bigger sisters with their homework until 1 a.m. After that, they all went to bed to get some much-needed rest. Before going to sleep, Billy turned on his breathing machine, which he used to keep his sleep apnea in check. Strangely, something woke him up only 2 hours after he fell asleep. Even though Billy was half still asleep, he went to check on his girls. Since Amanda's door was closed, he thought she turned on the hall light. She might have gotten up in the middle of the night to get a drink. When he opened the door to the other bedroom, he saw his 2 younger girls sleeping soundly in their beds. He went back to his bed, turned on his breathing machine, and fell back asleep right away. The next morning at 6 a.m., Billy was teased because his alarm clock was very loud. He told people afterward that when he slept for short amounts of time, he had dreams about the rapture. In his dream, Jesus came to go home with his servant. In his dream, he saw Amanda being taken away while he was left behind. She told him, "Bye, Daddy," as she went. He jumped out of bed to check on his girls, still shaken up from his scary dream. He was so happy to see that his 2 younger girls were still sleeping quietly in their beds, but his relief didn't last. Amanda's door was stuck because it was caught on the open closet door behind it. When he forced his way through the door, he saw something he couldn't have imagined. Amanda was lying still on her bed. When he tried to touch her, she was as cold as ice, and he knew his worst fear had come true. Still shocked, he wrapped his arms around her and called 911. Within minutes, doctors from the fire department were there, but their life-saving tools were broken. Amanda had really disappeared. Jason Dillon from the Rock Hill Fire Department asked Billy what he thought had happened. Billy said that she might have choked on her blanket because she rolled around in her sleep a lot. Soon after, police came to the house, marked it as a crime scene, and started to look into what happened. The police were interested right away in how Billy reacted to the death of his daughter. His calm behavior seemed fake, and he didn't show any expression. Hundreds of detectives soon came to the small house looking for signs, but the place was a mess and full of the family's things. There were piles of clothes on every surface. Dishes overflowed from the sinks, and cockroaches ran around in the corners. Amanda's body was found on her bed, fully dressed, surrounded by her books and the most recent school photos she had just gotten from the photographer. After being attacked, investigators found that she had been hit and choked to death. Her clothes showed that she had been hurt, and her body had marks on it. The proof was collected with the hope that it could be used to figure out who killed the person. As the police looked through the house for hints, they found another strange thing. After checking all the doors and windows, they found no signs that the house had been broken into. From inside, all of the doors were locked. This told police that the killer was probably someone who lived in the house. The detective went up to Billy and asked him about Amanda's death. Billy said that her blanket choked her while she slept, which was different from what the evidence at the crime scene showed. The officers knew that they had to look in more places. When they looked into his past, they found that both he and his wife had admitted to not taking care of their children properly 2 years before. This was the last piece of information they needed. It went with his cold response to her death, his strange story about how she died, and the fact that there were no signs of forced entry into the house. Billy seemed to be the main person the cops were looking into. They took him down to the police station so they could ask him more questions. Over the next few days, detectives questioned Billy very hard. He was questioned for 17 hours over the course of the next 4 days. On the first day of questioning, November 29, 2001, the same day as the murderer, detectives talked to Billy for 3.5 hours. After their first questioning, the detectives had no doubt that he had done the terrible thing. All they needed was for him to tell the truth. But the questioning records show that Billy said he wasn't guilty more than 650 times on that first day. He told the police that he loved his girls and that Amanda would never be hurt by him. He said that the only reason he didn't hear anything that night was because his sleep apnea machine was so loud that it drowned out any other sounds. The police didn't think this was likely, so they kept asking Billy questions to get him to say what he did. On the other hand, Billy wouldn't say what he did. They tried to use his faith against him by saying that because of what he had done, he would burn in hell. They also tried to get him to believe that the physical proof they had found matched him, so he would have nowhere to run. No matter what they said, Billy kept saying he had nothing to do with his daughter's murder. On the second day, as they were getting close to the 4th hour of questioning, Billy asked for a polygraph or lie detector test, thinking that it would finally prove his innocence. This is where Billy's life started to fall apart, which was a shame. Soon after starting the polygraph, the person running the test slammed his hand on the table and told the detectives that they had enough proof to stop the test. He told Billy that he had failed the test while looking him in the eyes. Billy was very sad. After they found out about these things, the cops asked Billy more questions to find out why he had done such a terrible thing to his daughter. He began to talk bit by bit. Billy finally admitted, but he seemed unsure of what he was saying. At the end of the first confession, he said in an official statement that he had killed his own daughter, but it wouldn't be over after that. By the end of the 4th day of questioning, Billy had given the police 4 different confessions. None of them fit each other or the evidence at the crime scene. In one confession, he said that he beat Amanda with a broom, but no other statement did he say this. Some statements talked about a dream, but in others, the dream was either left out or talked about in a very different way. The details from each statement did not match up with each other. Despite this, the agents believed them to be true, even though they thought Billy was very crazy. The fourth and final confession was a video reenactment. The cops took him back to his house and filmed him as he talked about what he did the night of the murder. Billy's many statements led him to being accused as the only person responsible for his daughter's death. But after these long interrogations, Billy took back everything he had said, and he said he was innocent. No matter what happened, the damage was done, and Billy was sent to jail without a bond or bail. It looked like the probe was over. A year had gone by since the murder. Billy said he did it, so many people, including those who knew him, were sure he was guilty. But Billy was now saying all over again that he was not guilty. Phil Beatty, a private lawyer from Rock Hill, was now sent to court to fight his case for him. Phil says that he thought Billy was guilty when he first met him. His plan for the case was to try to get Billy to plead guilty as soon as possible and put the whole thing behind him. But when Beatty talked to Billy about how he was interrogated in the first days after the murder, he was shocked by what he heard. When his court-assigned public defender, B.J. Baccarlo, arrived at the police station, the police did not allow him to the interrogation room to see Billy, a clear violation of his rights. They produced a note that Billy had allegedly signed, which stated that he did not want to see his attorney at that time. When Barcalo said that they could have forced him to write his note, they just didn't let him talk to his customer. After only his fourth statement did his defense attorney, B.J. Barcalo, was allowed to visit him. When he asked Billy why he had signed the confession, Billy said that the cops had told him that if he didn't, they would put him to death. Beatty was shocked by how badly Billy's rights had been broken, but because the statements were written and signed, he was worried about whether this information would help his case. At the end of 2002, the prosecutor's office called Beatty and asked to meet with him. He agreed to meet with them because he thought it was about a deal for his client, but he didn't know what they were going to say. They brought him down and told him that the DNA found on Amanda's body had finally been analyzed, and to everyone's surprise, it wasn't Billy's. Beatty was surprised and happy to hear this news because it meant that his client was suddenly innocent and that he had a real chance of winning this case. But what they told him next shocked him even more. He was told that the police knew within a few weeks of the murder that Billy's DNA did not match the crime scene, but they kept this information from him for almost a year. This made Beatty very angry. He couldn't believe that such a terrible wrong had been done and that Billy's lawyers hadn't been told about this information before now. But then he stopped and asked why they were telling him this information now, after all these months. If only they had known it wasn't Billy's DNA when the last piece of information was given to him all those years ago. He was told that all of this was being told to him now because the cops had found his DNA in their system and knew whom it belonged to. It was owned by a man named James Sanders. We don't know much about James Sanders' life, like where he came from or what he did before 2001. All that's known about him is that he was a repeat offender who had done other bad things before this one. 2 weeks before Amanda was killed, he had just gotten out of jail and moved into the same neighborhood as the Copes. He lived just 2 blocks away from Billy and his family in a house. There's no proof that the two guys knew each other, and they would have made an odd couple. His lawyer said that Billy Coop was a Caucasian man who weighed 385 pounds and didn't have many friends. He was a strong Christian who also wanted to become a teacher. On the other hand, James Sanders was an African-American repeat offender and drug user who had just gotten out of prison. In the 6 weeks after Amanda's murder in November 2001, Sanders did or tried to do 4 more sexual attacks in the neighborhood. When Billy's lawyers found out that someone else's DNA was found at the crime scene, They understood that Billy was not guilty. Then they asked him in depth why he had lied to the police when they asked him about the murder right after it happened. When police questioned Billy in the hours after the murder, he told his lawyers that he was sure he wasn't guilty, but he was also in shock because his daughter had died in such a terrible way. So he might have seemed like he had no feelings for them. He also said that he gave fake admits to confuse the police. He thought that his confessions wouldn't mean anything unless the police could prove them, and he didn't think any of his confessions were backed up by proof. But in this case, he was wrong, because the cops were willing to believe his confessions, even though they didn't match up with each other or the evidence they found at the scene. Billy was charged with the crime, even though Sanders was there on the night Amanda was killed. In 2004, the case went to court. During the trial, both sides tried to show what happened on the night of the murder. Billy's lawyers said that Billy had nothing to do with his daughter's death, but the prosecutors found a simple way to explain both Billy's confessions and the newly found DNA proof. They said that the only logical conclusion was that both of the men were involved in the crime and did it together. The police say that this is why there was no proof of a forced entry into the house. Billy had let Sanders in and then locked the door behind him when he left. Cope's lawyers said that prosecutors were just putting the information in this way to hide the fact that they had interrogated Cope in a way that was against the law. They said Cope had mental problems and was so upset about the death of his daughter that detectives were able to trick him into saying he did something he didn't do. Judge John C. Hayes III also said that the defense couldn't show important information to the jury because it might lead the jury to make logical mistakes. Sanders did or tried to do forced sexual assaults in the weeks after Amanda's death, but there was no sign of forced entry. This was taken away as evidence. Sanders seemed to have been an expert at breaking and entering because he didn't leave much for even the best police to find. A jailhouse source said he heard Sanders admit to raping and killing a young girl in Rock Hill. This was another important piece of evidence that the defense attorney was not allowed to show the jury. Courts often let this kind of evidence in when it helps the prosecutor, but in this case, it would have helped the defendant, so it was not allowed. Even though it might seem to you that Billy had nothing to do with his daughter's death, the judges did not agree. Sanders and Billy were both found guilty and charged with the plot, which means they worked together to do the crime. In 2004, each of them was given a life sentence without the chances of release. In April 2009, a three-judge panel from the South Carolina Court of Appeals said that there was no proof that Cope and Sanders knew each other. This meant that the original ruling was overturned, but the South Carolina Attorney General quickly filed an appeal, and the decision was thrown out in 2013. Cope's sentence was upheld by the highest court in his state, and the highest court in the United States did not hear his case. Even though all the proof showed that Billy wasn't guilty, he was still locked up. Billy Cope died of natural causes on February 9, 2017, while he was in state prison. He was 53 years old. After his accusing of killing his own daughter, he was never allowed to leave his jail cell. We'll leave it up to you to decide if he was really guilty or not. And there you have it, folks, the terrible story of how Amanda Cope was killed and what happened to her father, Billy, after that. What do you think about the situation? Do you think Billy did something wrong or not? More importantly, did Amanda Cope get her due? Please tell us what you think in the comment section below. If you liked the video, please like it, share it, and subscribe to our channel. Until next time, stay safe, and thanks for watching.